The hostess did not look at her when she said it. That was the part that stayed with Raymond Decker, long after everything else had settled. Not the words. Not even the tone. It was the way the young woman behind the podium kept her eyes fixed on the reservation screen, her finger moving slowly across the tablet, as if the old woman standing in front of her were a smudge on the glass she was choosing not to acknowledge. Raymond, 53 years old, a floor contractor from Beaumont, Texas, was standing 6 feet back in the entrance of Solare, the kind of restaurant where the lighting was warm and low and calculated, where the tablecloths were the color of cream, where the menu came without prices unless you asked. He had come in with his daughter Lexi, 22, home from her first semester nursing school, and they had a reservation for 2 at 7 o'clock. He was wearing the blue button-down Lexi had ironed for him that afternoon, standing stiffly in it, the way a man stands in clothes that aren't quite his. He noticed the old woman the moment he walked in. She was small. She wore a lavender cardigan over a white blouse, the kind of blouse with a small lace collar that women of a certain generation wore to church and to dinners and to any occasion they considered worthy of their good things. Her hair was white and pinned up carefully. She carried a beaded clutch purse that was old enough to have belonged to her mother. She was standing at the hostess podium, holding a small printed card in one hand, and she was being told something Raymond could not yet hear. He heard it when he got closer. "I'm sorry," the hostess said, still not looking up. "We don't have a reservation under that name." The old woman, her name was Eugenia Pruett, and she was 78 years old, and she had been a retired federal judge for 11 years, though none of that was visible on the lavender cardigan, held her card a little closer to the podium. "I have a confirmation," she said. Her voice was measured. She had spent decades in a courtroom, and she knew how to hold her voice even when her chest was tight. "The reservation is under Pruett. It was made 2 weeks ago for my birthday. My granddaughter called ahead." The hostess finally looked at her. It was a brief look, the kind of look that takes a measurement and decides the measurement is insufficient. "I do see a Pruett reservation," she said slowly. "But that reservation is for the private dining room. I'm going to need to confirm that with a manager before I can seat you there." "Then please confirm it," Eugenia said. "He's busy right now. I'll wait." The hostess looked back at her screen. It might be a while. Raymond had stopped moving. Lexi beside him had noticed too, and she put one hand lightly on his arm the way she did sometimes when she sensed that something was building in him, and she wasn't sure yet what it was. What was building was not anger, not exactly. It was something older and heavier than anger, something Raymond had felt before, in hardware stores and in bank lobbies, and in the parking lot of his son's school once, the feeling that comes when a person is being made small by someone who thinks it costs nothing to do so. He knew that feeling, because he had felt it himself. He knew it in the particular way you know a thing when you have worn it on your own body. He stepped forward. Lexi said quietly, "Dad." She was not telling him to stop, she was just naming him, grounding him, the way she had learned to do. He gave a small nod and then turned back toward the podium. "Excuse me," he said. The hostess looked at him with a professional smile that appeared and disappeared in under a second. "Sir, I'll be with you in just a moment." "I'm not in a hurry," Raymond said. He kept his voice even. He was a man who had poured concrete in July heat, and had learned that even-keeled was the only gear that worked when things got heavy. "I was just wondering if there's a problem I can help with." "There's no problem. We're just confirming a reservation." Eugenia turned to look at him. There was something in her eyes that he recognized. Not gratitude, not yet, but a kind of attentiveness. She was watching to see what kind of man he was. "The lady has a confirmation card," Raymond said, nodding toward the card in Eugenia's hand. "Seems like that should be enough to hold a spot while you sort it out." "Sir, I really do need to handle this. I understand that. I'm just saying she could sit down while you do." The hostess's smile returned, this time sharper at the edges. "I'm afraid our policy in these situations is to confirm before seating." Raymond looked at her for a moment, then he looked at the restaurant behind her. The full tables, the soft music, the candles, the wine. He looked at a booth near the window where two men in their 40s sat in untucked shirts, no reservation card, no scrutiny, just 2 glasses of bourbon and a bread basket. He looked back at the hostess. "What situations?" he said. The word landed the way a quiet word can land when the room is not as loud as it seems. The hostess's expression shifted slightly. She was young, maybe 25, and she was not entirely sure what was happening, but she understood that she had been asked a question she did not want to answer directly. "I just meant." "I heard what you meant," Raymond said. "I'm asking what you meant." Lexi had moved up beside him now, not speaking, just present. She was 22 and she had her mother's eyes, and her mother had been gone for 4 years, and Raymond had raised her the last stretch alone, and she had turned into someone he was quietly, consistently in awe of. Eugenia Pruitt was still standing at the podium. She had not sat down. She was not the kind of woman who sat down when she was told to wait in hallways. "I have eaten at this restaurant," Eugenia said calmly, "on 4 separate occasions. My late husband and I celebrated our 40th anniversary at the table near that window." She gestured, just slightly, toward the window. "The private dining room was booked for my 78th birthday at the request of my granddaughter, who made the reservation by phone on the 14th of this month. I have the confirmation number if it would help." She opened her beaded clutch and produced a slip of paper that she held out toward the hostess. The hostess did not take it immediately. That was when the manager appeared. His name was Todd Ferris, and he was 38 years old, and he had managed Solari for 6 years, and he walked with the slightly too fast gait of a man who had been watching the podium from across the room, and had decided he needed to get there before something became a situation he would have to explain later. "Good evening," he said, arriving with a smile that he deployed at everyone more or less equally. "Is everything all right here?" "We're just confirming a reservation," the hostess said quickly. "We are not just confirming a reservation," Raymond said, equally quickly, and he did not say it with any particular heat, just with the same flat accuracy with which he would tell you the square footage of a room. Todd looked at him, then at Eugenia, then at the slip of paper still extended in Eugenia's hand. "May I?" he said, and took it. He looked at it for a moment. Something crossed his face, but a kind of recalibration. "Mrs. Pruitt," he said. "Absolutely. Your table in the private room has been ready since 6:30. "I would apologize for the confusion," Eugenia said, "whether this is the kind of confusion that happens to everyone, or only to some people." Todd Ferris looked at her. "Because I have a fairly reliable sense," she continued, in that same courtroom calm voice, "of which category I fall into." He did not answer. Not directly. He said that he would personally escort her to her table, that her party had already arrived, that a complimentary aperitif would be brought immediately. He said all of this in the practiced language of hospitality management, the language to smooth and move forward and not to linger. Eugenia did not move yet. She turned to Raymond. "Thank you," she said. Just that. No performance in it. She had not needed rescuing, and they both understood that. But she had appreciated the company of someone who had chosen, for no reason except the right reason, to stand beside her. Raymond nodded. "Happy birthday, ma'am." Something shifted in her expression then, a brief softening, like the sun coming out for just a moment before it goes back behind the clouds. She followed Todd toward the private dining room. Lexi slipped her hand into her father's arm. "That was good, Dad," she said quietly. "She didn't need me," he said. "I know. You did it anyway." They were seated at their table near the back. Raymond ordered the catfish because he always ordered catfish, and the prices on the menu made him briefly regret owning eyes. But Lexi was laughing at something she was telling him about a professor. And the sound of her laugh in a room like this felt like a thing worth every number on the menu. So he stopped doing the math. He did not think about Eugenia Pruitt again that evening. He was not the kind of man who did things expecting a ledger to be kept. He paid the bill, which was more than he had planned for, and tipped 30% because he always did, and because the server had been kind to Lexi, and then he and his daughter walked out into the November air and drove home in his truck, which needed new wiper blades, and smelled faintly of sawdust, which is the smell Raymond Decker's world had carried for 30 years. He did not think about her again. But Eugenia Pruett thought about him. She was a woman who had spent decades on the federal bench making decisions that required her to read people accurately and quickly. She had been wrong before. She was not wrong often. And the man who had stepped up to that podium without hesitation, without apparent agenda, without even giving his name, had left an impression on her the way certain people do. Not because they try, but because they are so entirely themselves that their presence leaves a mark without meaning to. She asked the hostess his name before she left. The hostess, who was feeling chastened and cooperative, looked it up in the reservation system. Raymond Decker. Eugenia filed it away the way she filed everything, carefully, and with full intention of using it. She had not arrived at 78 years old, without accumulating both the means and the patience to do things properly. Her granddaughter Thea, who was 26 and worked in the charitable arm of Pruett Industrial, found her grandmother in an unusual mood on the drive home. Eugenia sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window and said, almost to herself, "There are still some of them left." "Still some of what?" Thea asked. "People who do things because they're right," Eugenia said, "and not because they're watching to see what it gets them." Thea glanced at her. "Did something happen?" "A man helped me tonight. He didn't know who I was. He just helped." She paused. "I want to find out more about him." Thea had grown up around her grandmother's decisions, and she had learned not to ask questions like why or to what end, because the answers always came eventually, and they were always more fully formed than anything she could have anticipated. "Okay," Thea said. What she found over the following week was this. Raymond Decker was a licensed flooring contractor with a company called Decker & Sons, which was a name that had outlasted the Sons in practice. Both of his boys had grown and left Beaumont, one to Houston, one to the Army, and so it was now Raymond alone, and occasionally a rotating cast of part-time workers he hired off a handshake and a reputation he had spent 30 years building. His wife, Sandra, had died 4 years earlier from a brain aneurysm, 3 days after a Sunday afternoon that had started like every other Sunday afternoon and then didn't. He had 2 adult sons and 1 daughter still in school. He had raised Lexi her last 2 years of high school alone, and then driven her to nursing school in September, and cried in the parking lot for 20 minutes before he drove home. His company had been struggling. A commercial contract he had relied on had fallen through in the spring. He had 3 residential jobs lined up, and they were not enough, and he had not told Lexi this, because she was focused on her studies, and he was not the kind of man who put his burdens on his children. He owed 6 months of back payments on a piece of equipment. He had refinanced the house once already. He was the kind of man who got up at 5 in the morning and figured it out, except that some mornings the math genuinely did not work, no matter how early you got up to stare at it. Eugenia sat with this information for a day. Then she called her grandson-in-law, Bart Schilling, who ran the commercial development side of Pruett Industrial, which included a regional headquarters renovation project in Beaumont that had stalled for 3 months because they could not find a flooring contractor whose work met the standard they needed and who could start within a reasonable window. "I have someone," she said. "You're recommending a contractor?" Bart said. "I am. On what basis?" "On the basis," Eugenia said, "that I know what kind of man he is, which is the most relevant qualification for any job." Bart was quiet for a moment. He had been married to Eugenia's granddaughter for 4 years, and he had learned that when Eugenia stated something with that particular quality of finality, the correct response was not a follow-up question. "Send me his information," he said. She did. What happened next was not magic, and it was not a fairy tale, and it was not instantaneous. Bart Schilling called Raymond Decker on a Wednesday morning in November, and Raymond answered on the second ring, the way he always answered, because he was the kind of man who answered calls. Bart explained the project. Raymond listened. The scope was larger than anything Raymond's company had handled in several years. The timeline was tight. The specifications were precise. The pay rate was significantly above what Raymond typically charged, because Pruett Industrial had a standards budget, and the standards were real. Raymond said he would come in Friday to walk the space. He did. He walked it methodically, the way he walked every space, measuring, noting subfloor conditions, crouching to touch the concrete, and reading it the way a doctor reads a pulse. He asked 12 questions and each one was relevant, and Bart Schilling, who had dealt with enough contractors to know the difference between a man performing competence and a man demonstrating it, took note. Raymond submitted a bid on Monday. It was fair. Not low. It was not the bid of a man trying to win with desperation. It was the bid of a man who had priced the job honestly and was willing to let the numbers speak. Pruett Industrial accepted it on Tuesday. Raymond was sitting in his truck in the driveway when he got the email, and he sat there for a while reading it in the late afternoon light and then, "Hey Dad, hey Lex, how's everything going?" "Good." "How's everything?" "Good. Long day, but good." "What's up?" "You sound weird." "I don't sound weird. You sound like you're trying not to sound excited about something." He laughed despite himself. "I got a contract." She screamed a little. "Dad, the big one you told me about?" "It's a good one, yeah, how good?" he told her. She was quiet for a moment and then she said very softly, the way she sometimes said things that were actually serious, "Mom would have said you deserved it." He sat with that for a moment. "Maybe so," he said. He did not yet know where the contract had come from. He knew the company. He did not know, and had no reason to think, that a 78-year-old woman had chosen him because of the way he had stood at a restaurant podium on a Tuesday night in November and said, very quietly, what situations, and refused to move. He found out 6 weeks later. He found out because the project was going well, the work was good, his crew was steady. The site manager had told Bart Schilling that Raymond ran a clean job, and Eugenia came in one afternoon to see the progress. She walked through the space with her cane and her same measured gait, and Raymond was in the far corner, overseeing a section of limestone tile installation, when he heard her voice, and turned around and saw her, and did not understand, for a moment, what he was seeing. She was here. In the building his crew was renovating. She looked at him across the half-finished floor, the way someone looks at a person when they've been waiting for the right moment to show their hand. "Mrs. Pruett," the site manager said, not quite understanding the look passing between them. "This is Raymond Decker, the contractor running the floor installation." Eugenia nodded. "We've met," she said. Raymond walked toward her slowly. He looked at her. He looked at the building around him. He looked back at her. "Solari," she agreed. He had the particular expression of a man putting pieces together that he had not known were a puzzle. "You did this," he said. "It was not a question. I referred your company." She said. The work spoke for itself after that. He was quiet for a moment. His crew was working behind him, the sound of tile spacers and levels and low voices filling the space, and he stood in the middle of it and looked at this small old woman in her lavender cardigan. Today it was gray actually, with pearl buttons, and he was not sure what the appropriate thing to say was. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally. "No," she said. "I didn't. I didn't do anything at that restaurant expecting something back." "I know," she said. "That's why." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in him that was moved and also something that was embarrassed, the specific embarrassment of a private man who has been seen doing a thing he didn't announce. "My daughter would have done the same thing," he said. "Anyone with any sense would have." "You would be surprised," Eugenia said, "how few people with senses actually use it, when it costs them something." He looked at his boots. New tile dust had already settled on them. "I appreciate it," he said. He did not mean the contract, or not only the contract. He meant being seen. He meant the return on an instinct he'd had at 6 feet from a podium on a Tuesday night, the instinct to stand next to someone who was being treated as if she weren't there. Eugenia nodded. Then she looked at the floor, at the limestone tile laid in a clean herringbone pattern, and she ran her eyes across it the way a person looks at something that is being made well. "The floor is beautiful," she said. "Thank you. It'll look better once we seal it." "I imagine most things do," she said. And it was almost a joke. delivered with the dry precision of a woman who had spent decades on the federal bench and knew exactly how to place a word. Raymond smiled. It was a slow smile, the kind that starts in the eyes before it gets to the mouth. He had not smiled like that in a while. The project ran 8 weeks. Raymond's company completed it 4 days ahead of schedule. Bart Schilling sent a letter of commendation that Raymond kept on his desk, not because he needed it, but because Lexi had framed it and brought it home for Christmas, and he was not going to argue with that. Pruitt Industrial referred him to 2 additional commercial clients in the spring. By the following autumn, Raymond Decker had brought his company back to the kind of ground it needed to be on. Not rich, not comfortable in any way that made him soft, but solid, even. The way good concrete is even before you lay something on top of it. Lexi finished her first year of nursing school. She called him every Sunday. She still asked about the floor projects the way she had always asked, with genuine curiosity, because her mother had loved that Raymond loved his work, and she had inherited the habit of loving that too. Raymond did not go around telling the story of what had happened. He was not the kind of man who told stories about himself. But one evening, sitting on his back porch in September with a beer, and the kind of quiet that only exists in the hour after the workday ends, and before the next one begins, he thought about it. He thought about the moment at the podium. The hostess who had not looked up. The woman in the lavender cardigan holding a confirmation card that should have been all the confirmation anyone needed. He had not done it to be seen. He had done it because not doing it had not seemed like an option. He had not known who she was. He had known only what he could see, which was someone being made to feel like she did not belong in a room she had every right to be in, and a younger man staying 6 feet back and calculating whether it was his business. He had decided it was his business. That was the whole of it. That had been enough. The September air moved through the yard, and he finished his beer, and went inside and washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and stood there for a moment looking out the window at the dark, and he thought. Sandra would have liked Eugenia Pruitt. She would have said she was sharp, said it the way she said things, like it was both a compliment and a fact. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. He was up again at 5.